lots of weapons. What is this weapon here?
It's a 40-millimeter grenade launcher. This is modern warfare. We use war technologies.
Against drug cartels. In a memo sent to Congress, the White House saying the U.S. is now in an armed conflict with the narco gangs and labeling their members not just as criminals, but as enemy combatants.
Ever wondered if a prison wall can keep a kingpin in check? On the night the DEA unleashed a 5-day assault on the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, a different, unimaginable takeover happened right under the watchful eyes of federal agents. Raw, never-before-seen footage has just surfaced, and it shows none other than El Chapo himself walking through the corridors, commandeering the facility, and turning the prison into his own command center. This isn't a Hollywood stunt. It's the real story of how a drug lord slipped past the nation's toughest security and staged a full-blown occupation from within the very walls meant to contain him. Stay tuned as we dive into the leaked footage, uncover the chain of events, and explore what this means for the U.S. drug war and federal corrections. On the night of September 22, 2025, a quiet hum of computers filled a federal command center that had been built for secrecy and speed. Screens flickered, maps lit up, and a single clock read 5:47 a.m. The silence was deliberate. It was the moment that a decades-long, worldwide operation finally began to converge, a moment that would test the limits of coordination across borders and agencies. The target was no ordinary criminal organization. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG, had carved a name into the dark corners of law enforcement worldwide. Over years, it had flooded U.S. streets with meth, cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl, turning entire neighborhoods into battlegrounds for addiction. Yet that morning, the United States was poised to strike back with a force so overwhelming that the cartel's ability to adapt would be put to the ultimate test. The plan was simple, yet devastatingly effective. Sever every pipeline, disrupt each distribution node, and destroy the infrastructure that sustained the cartel's empire. It was a 5-day assault involving 23 U.S. field divisions and 7 foreign partners. Timing was critical. Every raid, every bust was synchronized so that CJNG would have no moment to reroute product, destroy evidence, or hide money. If even a single node survived, the cartel could recover. But if the chain snapped everywhere at once, the empire would choke. In the early hours, agents reported an unprecedented sluggishness within CJNG's network. Usually, when a single city fell, the cartel would simply shift its traffic to another corridor. This time, there was nowhere to run. Raids detonated across Los Angeles, Texas, the Pacific Northwest, and New England, all within the same window. At the same instant, foreign partners targeted CJNG assets overseas. The strike was fast, silent, and ruthless. The question that hovered over every command channel was clear. How deep had CJNG embedded itself into American life? The answer came in waves of shocking confirmations. Stash houses appeared in quiet suburbs. Distribution hubs opened near family neighborhoods. Couriers, once known only as shadows on the streets, were now seen blending in as everyday workers. CJNG was not a street gang hiding in the dark. It was a global enterprise operating in more than 40 countries, disguised as normalcy. Within 72 hours, surveillance teams observed the first signs of panic inside the cartel's own ranks. Couriers vanished from their routes. Regional distributors went dark. Financial channels froze. CJNG's fluid communication fractured, and the machine that had run for years began to cough, stumble, and lose rhythm. The window to finish the job was now wide open, but it would not stay that way for long. Then came the seizures. When agents breached warehouses and transport nodes, they uncovered staggering quantities. 6,000 kilograms of methamphetamine, nearly 23,000 kilograms of cocaine, 92 kilograms of fentanyl powder, and 1.1 million counterfeit fentanyl pills, each potent enough to kill. Every bag, every crate was more than contraband. Each represented lives that would have been lost, families that would have buried loved ones, neighborhoods that would have drowned in addiction. The hits didn't stop at narcotics. Agents seized $48 million in cash and assets CJNG used to buy loyalty, traffic influence, and expand its reach. Alongside it, 244 firearms were pulled from circulation, tools of intimidation, enforcement, and terror. CJNG felt the blow. For the first time, its U.S. network wasn't bending under pressure, it was breaking. But as agents pushed further, one realization sent a chill through the command floor. If this much product, money, and firepower existed on American soil, what else was still buried in the system? The discoveries that followed would reveal the cartel's true scale and prove that this takedown was only the opening move. Across those 5 days, agents uncovered a multinational engine that ran on logistics, discipline, and death. As intelligence files were compiled, a clearer picture emerged. The network they had just struck was only one layer of a structure spread across continents. Chemical precursors came from foreign suppliers. Mega labs operated in Mexico. Cross-border transport routes used commercial trucks. Suburban stash houses fed local redistributors, who delivered one shipment at a time to neighborhoods. CJNG didn't behave like a gang. It operated like a corporation, with a single product line: poison. That was the threat. Even decapitated, the machine could regrow. Even crippled, it could adapt. Federal commanders, DEA analysts, and every agent in the field understood a simple reality. This takedown mattered only if the infrastructure stayed broken. If even one corridor reopened, CJNG would return with the same brutality, the same money, the same reach. Yet this time, the cartel didn't get its usual breathing room. For years, it had thrived by exploiting delays: court, jurisdiction, and communication. But during this surge, there were none. The hits came too fast, too widespread, too synchronized to counter. When Los Angeles was breached, Houston was already being raided. When New England fell silent, the Pacific Northwest had already been struck. The cartel's once unfathomable reach was now exposed to a coordinated, relentless onslaught that had never been attempted before. In the aftermath, the lessons were unmistakable. A global threat cannot be stopped by isolated actions. It requires the same level of coordination and precision that it once wielded. The operation that began at 5:47 a.m. on September 22, 2025, had shown that with unified intent, the world can dismantle even the most formidable criminal networks. The foundation of CJNG's empire has been struck hard enough that its future operations are now uncertain. The question remains: will the cartel manage to rebuild, or will the cracks widened in this decisive blow lead to its eventual decline? The answer will unfold in the days to come, but for now, the narrative has changed, and the story of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel has taken a pivotal turn. When those numbers were first logged, agents didn't see statistics. They saw the scale of destruction that had been quietly woven into the fabric of everyday life. The realization hit like a tidal wave.
Watch that federal agents arrested and flipped twin brothers from Chicago's Little Village neighborhood, Pedro and Margarita.
The cartel had not just been smuggling drugs across borders, it had been transplanting a lethal plant into the soil of American suburbs. In the quiet streets of a midtown neighborhood, a delivery driver in a nondescript van had just dropped off a crate that would later be found to contain a kilogram of methamphetamine disguised behind boxes of office supplies. The next stop, a family-owned hardware store, had a secret basement locker where counterfeit fentanyl pills pressed to look like prescription tablets were shelved alongside real medications. Every ordinary corner, every familiar storefront was a potential node in a vast network that fed the cartel's appetite for profit and dominance. The sheer magnitude of the seizure, 6,000 kilos of methamphetamine, nearly 23,000 kilos of cocaine, 92 kilos of fentanyl powder, and a staggering 1.1 million counterfeit pills was matched only by the financial hemorrhage that followed. $77 in cash stolen from money laundering pipelines had vanished into the net, leaving behind a void that the cartel could not easily fill. Shell companies that had once shrouded illicit transactions were forced into liquidation. Safe houses that had been rented under false pretenses were seized. And the web of corruption that had bought silence and loyalty was exposed to scrutiny. For the first time, the agency's analysts were forced to confront a new definition of threat. They had moved beyond the label of a cartel. The evidence pointed to an entity that operated with the precision and brutality of a foreign terrorist organization. Its weapon was addiction. Its battlefield was the American street. Its casualties were measured in overdose statistics. The sheer scale of the drug pipeline, combined with the ability to infiltrate ordinary communities, made the operation not merely a law enforcement success, but a public health triumph. This paradigm shift demanded a new strategy. The goal could no longer be limited to seizure and arrest. It had to be to sever the entire infrastructure that sustained the cartel. Analysts began to trace every intercepted call, every decoded packet, every pattern of movement within the seized data. Each phone that had been seized unlocked a new branch of the internal map, revealing a hierarchy that stretched from the cartel's Mexican megalabs all the way to suburban couriers who operated under the guise of legitimate business. The leadership, however, remained elusive. While agents had dismantled the front line, the central command still sat in shadow, poised to regroup. The operation's urgency intensified. In the final 48 hours, teams coordinated in real time, collapsing communication nodes, intercepting courier chains, and freezing financial routes before they could be rerouted overseas. Rapid takedowns and non-stop intel sweeps became the new rhythm of the day. Every hour that passed without action risked a recovery. The analysts' dashboards lit up with flashes of activity, anomalous data spikes that hinted at a surviving command line. Their frustration was palpable. They understood that if even one line remained intact, the machine could rebuild in days, not months. Meanwhile, the narrative of the operation shifted from triumphant seizures to a stark awareness of the hidden networks. CJNG had been integrating itself into ordinary landscapes. Suburban stash houses, commercial trucking routes, small shell companies, neighborhood fronts. The drugs were mass-produced in Mexican labs, but the delivery system was domestic. Quiet streets and everyday traffic became conduits for the cartel's lethal cargo. The fact that families lived a few walls away from these hidden hubs, unaware of the danger that loomed in their midst, amplified the urgency. The seized assets were not just trophies, they were the lifeblood that kept the cartel's arteries flowing. The leadership still survived, hidden among the survivors of the raids. The network's middle tier had shown signs of panic. Coordinators who had once moved product with absolute discipline now remained silent. Some abandoned their routes, others tried to run. Courier channels that pulsed like arteries began to shut down. For a moment, it seemed the machine was stalling. But then, encrypted chatter began to surface, subtle, low-volume signals that indicated that a few nodes were still communicating. The agents understood that the cartel was gasping for air. If those messages found the right operators, the network could be rebuilt in days, not months. That was the nightmare scenario. The realization that CJNG could survive even a partial blow to its infrastructure forced the command to adjust its approach. Instead of chasing the high-profile leaders, they focused on breaking the loops that allowed the cartel to reconstitute itself. They targeted the financial arteries, the communication channels, and the infrastructure that the cartel had built into everyday life. By stripping away the money, they deprived the cartel of its weapon to finance shell companies, safe houses, and corruption. By shutting down the courier chains, they cut off the lifeline that fed the cartel's supply to American communities. At the end of the 5 days, the numbers told a story that no briefing could fully capture. The operation had become one of the largest cartel disruptions in modern U.S. history. Yet, behind closed doors, commanders repeated the same warning. This was only round one. The leadership was still out there, and the next 72 hours would determine whether the empire remained down or found a way to rise again. This was not a victory lap, it was a race against time. In the silence that followed the raids, a sense of cautious optimism lingered. The operation had taken a decisive blow to the cartel's infrastructure, and the immediate threat had been curtailed. But the underlying question remained. Would the cracks widened by the surge lead to the cartel's eventual decline? Or would the machine, like a resilient organism, find new pathways to survive? The answer would unfold in the days to come. For now, the narrative had changed. The story of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel had taken a pivotal turn, leaving law enforcement and the nation to decide how the next chapter would be written. The surge left a scar across the map of America's drug war. In the immediate days that followed the final raid, analysts sat hunched over screens, crunching the raw figures that had just poured out of the field. 6,700 arrests, nearly 1 million counterfeit pills, a staggering 6,000 kilos of meth, 23,000 kilos of cocaine, 92 kilos of fentanyl powder, and 250,000 firearms, all accompanied by a crisp $48 million in cash and assets seized. On paper, the numbers were staggering. On the ground, the message was stark. CJNG's visible arms had been cut off. But the cartel's engine was not built on a single point of failure. Money kept CJNG breathing, and with that $48 million taken out of circulation, the ripple spread far beyond the confiscated stacks of cash. Bribes that once slipped through the fingers of border officials, the hush money that paid for new recruiters, the hush money that kept safe houses operating in quiet suburbs, all these streams were suddenly snatched away.
He's saying that he agrees the United States needs to continue to try to stop the cartels, but worries these moves from the president.
For a moment, the operation felt as if it had outrun the cartel itself, a surge that had reached the heart of the network. Yet no one celebrated. The war was far from over. The leadership, the core of CJNG's hierarchy, remained beyond U.S. borders, watching the tide rise and fall from a distance. The final hours of the surge were the most frantic, with interrogations running non-stop, intelligence teams hunting for remaining contacts, and surveillance units scanning every inch of the perimeter for a single flicker of regrouping activity. Each second carried a weight. If the cartel could re-establish a foothold before the surge concluded, every triumph could evaporate. That pressure was palpable in the command center, where the scorecards looked historic, but the reality was a temporary silence in a long, unforgiving war. The war's next chapter was not about one raid or one burst of violence. It was about understanding how CJNG operated like a global corporation. It had foreign suppliers, rotating traffickers, disposable couriers, and a leadership insulated behind layers of distance and deniability. Cutting off every visible arm of the cartel did not dismantle its body, it merely broke its surface. The lessons that emerged were clear. A single point of attack was insufficient. The only strategy that would endure was relentless pressure. Synchronized strikes that left the cartel no room to breathe, no corridors to exploit, and no time to adapt. The surge had proven that agencies moving as one could shake CJNG to its foundation, but it also revealed a darker truth. The cartel's real power lay in placement. Placement meant that the cartel could hide in the everyday, suburbs, routine traffic, counterfeit pills that looked innocuous until they killed. The battlefield had moved from border crossings to the streets, schools, and quiet neighborhoods where a single pill could end a life. The seizure of the drugs and the money were only the first shockwave. The underlying infrastructure, shell companies, bribed officials, recruitment networks, remained intact, poised to rebuild. In the days that followed, federal agencies convened to map the next move. They realized that the war could not be won by a single operation. The operation had shown that the cartel's empire could be shaken to its foundation, but the next time it moved, America would be waiting. This meant a pivot from reactive raids to proactive intelligence. Surveillance would become more granular, focusing on the hidden nodes that had survived the raids. Interagency cooperation would intensify, with the FBI, DEA, CBP, and local law enforcement sharing real-time data on suspicious movements and financial transactions. International cooperation became a focal point. The cartel's supply chains stretched beyond the U.S. into Mexico and further into Central America. Coordinating with Mexican authorities, the U.S. sought to disrupt the flow of drugs from the labs that continued to churn out meth and fentanyl. Simultaneously, they targeted the financial arteries that linked those labs to American distributors. By cutting off the money, the cartel could not afford the bribes that kept corrupt officials in line, the recruitment of new operatives, or the maintenance of safe houses. The narrative that emerged from the surge was one of resilience and adaptation. The cartel, though battered, was not broken. The new focus was on constant pressure, keeping the cartel off balance, preventing it from regaining footing. It was a lesson in persistence, a war that could not be won by a single raid, but by a series of coordinated, relentless strikes that made the enemy believe that any attempt to rebuild would be met with immediate, decisive retaliation. The seizure of $48 million in cash and assets was a turning point that demonstrated how removing money could cripple a cartel's operations. It highlighted the importance of financial disruption as a strategy. Yet it also underscored that money was only one part of a larger system. Even as the financial arteries were severed, the cartel's ability to place itself in the fabric of everyday life remained. That was the true test of the U.S. response, to disrupt not only the drugs and the money, but also the invisible network that allowed the cartel to survive in the shadows of suburban streets and ordinary traffic. As the operation concluded, the briefings reflected a sobering truth. The seizure stopped a wave, but waves come in sets. More networks existed, more suppliers stood ready, and more profits drove the machine forward. CJNG's reach was global, and so the response must be global too. The war was not over. It had merely shifted to a harder chapter, one where the battlefield is every street, every school district, every quiet neighborhood. The war was a fight against a global threat that could rebuild fast if given the chance. The next time it moved, America would be waiting, prepared to strike faster, deeper, and harder than any cartel expects. The seizure had thrown the cartel into a stunned limbo, and as the dust settled, the cracks exposed an even larger threat: the ability to rebuild from within. In the weeks that followed, intelligence officers pieced together a disturbing picture of the cartel's next play. Rumors had begun to surface that the once suppressed leader, El Chapo himself, had slipped into a high-security facility, but somehow managed to orchestrate a takeover from his cell. The video that leaked online was a masterclass in audacity. Footage captured a prisoner, his face obscured by a mask, standing at the head of a group of guards. Each of the guards, in a chilling moment, lowered their hands and stepped aside as if they had been commanded by a commander on the other side of the cell walls. Behind the scenes, a chain of covert operations had been set into motion. Analysts traced the chain back to a hidden network of informants and corruption that allowed the cartel to control even the most fortified corners of the penal system. It was a stark reminder that the war was no longer just in the streets. It had moved into the corridors of power. With this new intelligence, federal agencies realized they were playing a chess game with an opponent who could move from anywhere on the board. The focus shifted from traditional raids to dismantling the invisible scaffolding that supported the cartel's operations. Every intercepted call, every suspicious transaction, and every new shipment had to be mapped in a way that would expose the hidden hand guiding them. The partnership between the DEA and FBI intensified, and a new task force formed, drawing in experts in cyber intelligence, financial forensics, and human resources manipulation. One of the key breakthroughs came from the discovery of a ring of corrupt officers embedded in the Department of Corrections. Evidence indicated that these officers had received payments through shell companies that traced back to the cartel's money laundering network. Their role was not merely to keep tabs on prisoners, they were, in fact, the cartel's eyes and ears inside the prison walls. By cutting off these lifelines, the task force was able to neutralize the network that allowed El Chapo's voice to echo across the cell block.